Hey everyone, welcome to Massachusetts Sports Central. This is our NFL Power Rankings after Week 13 of the season. Just to remind everyone what these rankings are, this list represents how likely we think that each team will win Super Bowl 52. It is not an ordered list of the best teams necessarily. It also isn't a random list based on who beat who last week. So basically this list is less reactionary than many of these types of power rankings. There is a little more clarity this week compared to most again. Not surprising as we get near the end of the season. You will see some of the same basic clustering that we settled in last week. You'll see the lousy teams, and then the decent NFC teams that pretty much have no chance, no realistic shot at making the playoffs. Then the cluster of AFC teams that aren't very good, but several will make the playoffs. And then you will have the actual good teams. There is definitely some movement within those clusters, and not surprisingly, there is some shuffling at the very top. Okay, on to the rankings. Number 32. This just in, the Browns suck, and they continue to suck. And they're at this point they're basically in a tier by themselves of just barely being capable of being called an NFL team. I won't say they're gonna go 0-16 because they do have potential winnable games with the Bengals and the Bears, but they are deep. They're in it deep, and they have a decent chance of not winning anything. Number 31, moving down one slot, the New York Football Giants. They have had a complete cluster going on there. Obviously, they lost again. They didn't look good doing it. They don't have a lot of high prospects of doing anything else. They did fire McAdon't and the general manager Reese, but I think that's probably the right move going forward. But it doesn't mean much for this season. I'd be surprised if they could win another game. Number 30, moving down three slots, the Denver Broncos. They got dominated by the Dolphins. Let's just let that sink in for a second. They got dominated by the Dolphins. I think it's time to admit that the defense stinks now too. Now, granted, the offense had a lot of turnovers, and the Dolphins did score on defense, so it's not quite as bad as the score looks, but I mean, they have been hemorrhaging points recently. So, yes, the offense is putting a lot of pressure on them, but they are not stepping up whatsoever. This team is terrible top to bottom, and they're in dead last place in arguably the worst division in football. So, they deserve to be moved down this far. Number 29, staying put, the Chicago Bears. Lost again. They're last place. They have no chance of moving up, in the standings at least. Not much to say about them. You could argue that maybe they should be I can't see who they should be ahead of, really. Because at number 28, moving up 3 slots, one of our big movers of the week, the San Francisco 49ers, who beat said Bears. Even though they have one less win than the Bears at this point, they have been playing better recently. They played better early in the season with a lot of losses. They've been playing better recently, and now they have that glimmer of hope with Garoppolo starting now. So I think that gives them a little bit of an edge over the Bears. Obviously, the head-to-head win, but even though they have less losses or less wins, than the Broncos or the Bears, I think this is a deserving little bit of a move up. Number 27, the Indianapolis Colts, moving up one slot. This is one of those situations they just moved up because I moved the Broncos down a few slots. Still a bad team, one of the worst teams in the league. Lost again. Not much to say there. Number 26, moving down one slot, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. They lost again. They're not very good. They have no chance of doing anything. Terribly disappointing season. Again, not too much else to say here. Number 25, the Houston Texans. Obviously, we'll talk a little bit more about that. They had their lost season because of all those injuries. With the Bucks, they just were disappointing. Same thing with the Giants. There was really no reason per se. Well, I guess the Giants did have a lot of injuries, but those injuries happened after they got off to a god-awful start. So, the Bucks, there was really no reason that they should have been so much worse than expectations. The Texans clearly were they weren't doing awesome when Watson got hurt, but they were seeming to make up for some of the defensive injuries and were playing a lot better. But once he went down, coupled with all those other injuries, they pretty much were done. Too bad for them. All right, number 24, moving up 2 slots, the Miami Dolphins. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, they dominated the Broncos. So the Broncos are god-awful, so not going to put too much stock in that. They are, I guess they might not be mathematically eliminated from the playoffs, but they really have no shot. I guess the one thing they have going for them, is they play the Pats again, and they play the Bills twice. So, if they can win all those games, they might have a chance. That obviously is not going to happen. They might win a game with the Bills, but obviously they could win the New England game, but they basically need to win out to have any chance. So, good for them for beating the Broncos, but that's, more of a moral victory and, for things like these power rankings more than anything else. Number 23, the Arizona Cardinals. They lost to the Rams. No great, what am I trying to say? Nothing to be ashamed of there. They are moving down 3 slots. Again, that's, more has to do with the teams around them than what they did. Obviously, they won that game against Jacksonville last week, so that helped them move up probably higher than they should be. Again, especially in the NFC, they have no shot at the playoffs at this point. So, good for them for having a slightly better season than I would have expected, given the injuries that they've had as well. All right, number 22, the Washington Redskins, moving down 4 slots. They're actually the biggest mover of the week. Yeah, I think they're the only four slot mover. Losing to the Cowboys and losing pretty bad, so that didn't help them that they lost so badly. But they pretty much are out of the playoffs because the NFC is tough. Those wild card slots are actually going to have some pretty good teams that have pretty good records. So, if they were in the AFC, they would still be on life support. In the NFC, they're done. All right, moving on. Number 21, staying put, the Cincinnati Bengals. They lost again. They probably should have beaten the Steelers. I'm not going to give them. So, basically, the fact that they almost beat a good team, I'm not going to give them a lot of credit for that, but I'm also not going to ding them as much for losing because they almost beat a good team. So just keeping them put. They suck. They have no chance at anything. Even in the crappy AFC, they have no chance at anything. They have too many teams ahead of them. Number 20, moving up 3 slots, the New York Jets. Jets. Jets beat the Chiefs, who are reeling now. The Jets really don't have any shot at the playoffs, but again, they as I've said many times in these, you have to be impressed with how far they've exceeded their preseason expectations. So even though they're not going to end up with a great season by any stretch of the imagination, they were not the complete dumpster fire that people thought they were going to be. And beating the Chiefs really makes some stuff interesting in the AFC West now. So good for them, keeping things interesting if nothing else. Number 19, also moving up 3 slots, the Green Bay Packers. They obviously didn't have the most amazing game. They beat a crappy Bucks team in overtime, but that was enough. Now they're still 500. They're still, because they got the Browns next week, so that's a good, even Brett Hundley should be able to perform well there. And there is the chance that they might get Aaron Rodgers back as soon as the next game after that. So if they can win there, again, very much the whole life support situation, but they are not eliminated yet. And, if they can run the table, they could be in it. They might be far enough behind that doesn't do it, but they still have the smallest of chances. Speaking of having the smallest of chances, the number 18 Detroit Lions moving down 2 slots. They are still tied in the standings with Green Bay, so they have more or less the same kind of outlook, which isn't great. So, not too much to say there. They probably also have to win out in order to make things happen. And since those 2 teams played each other, as in them and the Packers in the last week of the season, only one of them can even possibly do that. Number 17, kind of a similar situation again, moving up 2 slots, the Dallas Cowboys, also 6-6, also kind of on life support for the playoffs. If they can win out, they certainly have a chance. They don't have a horribly difficult schedule, but they don't have an easy schedule either. I don't see them winning out, and I also, again, any of those 3 teams could win out and still miss the playoffs. So, the NFC is just pretty strong at the top, so it's going to be tough for anybody. Good for them for beating the Redskins to keep their hopes alive, but I just think they're too far behind at this point with too tough of a road to go. Number 16, falling down 3 slots, the Buffalo Bills. Also a 6-6 team, but they are still on the cusp of making the playoffs. That just shows the difference after you get past a couple of teams in the AFC versus the NFC. Obviously, they got whooped by the Pats. Again, kind of like what I was saying about the Cardinals. No shame in that per se, but it definitely makes it a lot harder on them. Especially with the Ravens winning, they're now a little bit farther behind in the playoff chase. They have another game with the Patriots, but other than that, they have 2 games against the Dolphins and a game against Indy. So those are all 3 winnable games. They could end up 9-7. That may or may not be good enough to make the playoffs. Right now, I think even if they do that, they probably aren't. And, it would not be shocking if they only split with Miami. Still assume they will take the Colts game, though they could very well lose that. I don't see them beating the Patriots in Foxborough. So I think they're probably going to be an 8-8 team. Decent chance at 9-7. I don't think they're going to be any better than that, and I don't think their 9-7 will make the playoffs. But it's certainly possible. All right, number 15, moving down 1 slot, the reeling Kansas City Chiefs. Here we're going to have our cluster of AFC West teams. And I'm putting the Chiefs at the very bottom, even though technically they are still in first place based on tiebreakers, and they do have probably a slightly easier schedule than the other 2. And they have the advantage of... So all 3 of these teams still play each other. So the Chiefs play the Raiders and the Chargers still, and the Raiders and Chargers also play each other. So that's really what's going to determine if one team steps up and wins both of their games, they probably are going to take it. And if one team loses 2 games, they are going to be completely out of it. If everybody splits the right way, so everybody ends up 1-1 against each other, the Chiefs definitely have an advantage because Oakland and LA Chargers both split with the Broncos. So like I said, if all 3 of those teams end up splitting with each other, it'll go to division record, and both of them are going to be 3-3, where the Chiefs still have already won a game against the Broncos and have 1 left. And as we discussed, the Broncos are awful, so it would come down to them just having to beat the Broncos if everybody's tied, which is not an unreasonable thing to look at. But the Chiefs have just been playing so bad recently that I put them at the bottom of this 3-team list here. All right, number 14, the Oakland Raiders, moving up 2 slots. So basically explained everything that you need to know with the Chiefs thing. Oakland actually won last week. They beat the Giants. That's not anything amazing, but they did what they needed to do. They're 6-6. They're tied with the Chiefs, and the Chargers. Still have to play both of them. So again, like I said, it depends on what happens in these head-to-head matchups. Number 13, the LA Chargers, moving up 2 slots. So I put them at the top only because they are just playing the best of the 3 teams right now. So even though they don't have any particular advantage, and in some ways they have a disadvantage, especially against the Chiefs, I just have more confidence that they might actually pull out a non-division game against a not terrible opponent. Blanking on exactly what their schedule is off the top of my head, but yeah, I mean, these 3 teams are going to duke it out. I don't think there's going to be much separation between them. I think the Chargers are just the hot hand right now, and that's why they're the top of the list. But like I said, one of these 3 teams is going to make the playoffs, and likely the other 2 are not going to be in serious contention for the wild card, is my guess. But a team seriously in contention for the wild card, number 12, the Baltimore Ravens staying put. They won this week, so now they are firmly in that 6th seed. They're actually only one game out of the 5th. I don't see that happening, but it's not insane for that to be a possibility. So they are a game ahead of, like I said, the last 4 teams that we talked about. I think the only real threat, and if you can call it that, is the Bills, only because I have a hard time believing the second place team in the AFC West will end up better than the Ravens. I could see maybe the team that wins it, but then the second team would also have to be better than them, because obviously of the 3 AFC West teams, whoever ends up the best is going to win the division. So the second best team would actually have to be better than the Ravens, and I don't think that's going to happen. All right, number 11, also staying put, the Jacksonville Jaguars. They are in the 5th seed right now. They are tied record-wise with the Titans for the division, but the Titans currently own the tiebreaker. They are a game ahead of the Ravens for the 5th slot, and obviously 2 games up on all the other also-rans to make the playoffs. So I can't see them missing the playoffs at this point. Certainly not utterly impossible, but also what I was just saying is pretty much the Ravens would need to pass them in the standings. And the Bills would have to overtake them because, as I said, I don't see the second-place team in the AFC West being ahead of them. Frankly, I don't even think the first-place team has a good chance of being ahead of them at this point. Pretty much the only way the Jags don't miss the playoffs is if they don't win another game, and they have a pretty easy schedule. They have one tough game, Seattle, and then obviously they play the Titans in the last week of the season. So those potentially could both be losses, but then they have 2 easy games. Forgetting what they are off the top of my head, but they should win both of those games. Number 10, the Tennessee Titans, tied with the Jags in the standings, have the tiebreaker. That's why they're ahead. I also have a little more faith in them. As I've talked about, I don't have a lot of faith in the Jaguars, even though they definitely have a very good defense. And Bortles actually played really well last week. So I know we're talking about the Titans now, but I'm just going to dwell back on the Jags because obviously these 2 teams are intertwined for the rest of the season. Similar to the Jaguars, the Titans have one tough game, the Rams, and then 2 fairly easy games, and then the head-to-head matchup. So I do think this division is going to come down to that Week 17 matchup. And it could be the winner of that game. While I don't think very much of either of these teams at this point, the winner of that game could very easily have 11, maybe even 12 wins. If they can actually, if these teams win the 2 games that they should, and win the tough game that they have going into it, which isn't impossible. I don't think it's going to happen. I think they probably both go in as 10-5 teams, with the winner being 11-5 and the loser being 10-6, being the 3rd and 5th seed. Because I don't think certainly the AFC West team can't even win 11 games at this point. So I assume that that will be the 4th seed. All right, number 9, moving up 2 slots, moving down 2 slots, the Carolina Panthers. They lost to the Saints, which pretty much and they got swept by the Saints, so that pretty much ends their hopes of a division title. They are only technically a game behind, but since they lose the tiebreaker, they have to finish 2 ahead of the Saints. So they need to win 2 more games than the Saints do the rest of the way, just to actually finish ahead of them in the standings for the division. So I don't see that happening. I do think that they still are most likely going to win a wild card. There's a chance that they don't, but they would have to play pretty badly. And one of the things that would have to happen is number 8, the Atlanta Falcons, who staying put would have to finish ahead of them. Not impossible. They're only 1 game behind. They did lose this week as well. They lost to the Vikings, so again, no shame there. That's why they're not moving. I like the Falcons better than the Panthers. This is pretty much the only reason that they're here, because if you look at it, their schedule's probably a little bit tougher, and they are a game behind, and they already lost to the Panthers this year. So the more I'm saying this, I probably should have these 2 teams flipped. But I mean, they were going to be 8-9. There was no debate in my head about that. Maybe I should flip them, but a lot of it will come down. So this week, the Panthers are playing Minnesota. I assume they'll probably lose that game. The Falcons have the Saints at home. obviously, that's a tough challenge for them if they win the home game, because actually one of the things I said, they have a tough schedule because they play New Orleans twice still. If they can win the home game there, that definitely gives them a little bit of a puncher's chance to finish, possibly even get the division if they win both games against the Saints. I don't see that happening, but they have a little bit more of a best case scenario, better chance than the Panthers do. But so like I said, those two teams are right there. Falcons actually are not in playoff position right now, while the Panthers are. So again, the more I'm saying this, the more I think I actually maybe should have flipped these two. But like I said, they were going to be 8-9 regardless. Because number 7, the Seattle Seahawks are moving up 2 slots after beating the Eagles. I thought this would be a pretty good game. I did pick the Eagles because it was hard not to. But the Seahawks showed that they are not dead. They are still in it. They're still going to be a contender. They are now a game ahead of the Falcons, which is important because the Falcons do own that tiebreaker. So they do actually have to finish ahead of the Falcons in the standings. They are technically tied with the Panthers. I'm not sure how the tiebreakers works for the 5th or 6th seed right now. But they're playing pretty well, and with their experience and with Russell Wilson at quarterback, I think so. I give them an advantage over the other two teams, even though obviously they have the previous 2 reigning MVPs on the 2 teams right behind them, but I still think Wilson's better than either of them. So we'll see what happens there. Like I said, these 3 teams are pretty much going to most likely be 2 of those teams are going to be the wild cards, and the other one's going to miss the playoffs. Seahawks still have a chance at still catching the Rams. They have they're only 1 game up behind, and they already won the head-to-head, and they play 1 more head-to-head. And it's actually in Seattle, so if they can beat the Rams, they actually could still win the division. In which case, I think that only one of those NFC South teams makes the playoffs, because I do not see the Rams falling all the way out of the playoffs. It's not impossible, but I really can't see that happening. Number 6, even though they won, moving down the Steelers 2 slots, because the Bengals stink. And not just that, if you look at their last 4 games, 3 of their last 4 games, they played bad teams and barely won. So in those 3 games and 3 or 4 games I'm talking about, they needed last second heroics to beat the Colts, last second heroics to beat the Rodgerless Packers, and last second heroics to beat the Bengals. Those teams range from not very good to just straight up bad. And they barely beat any of them. Now, they won every game. That's obviously the most important thing. But also, they also lost to the Bears early this year, too. So, I mean, they're definitely playing down to their competition. They've been lucky and have gotten away with it for the most part. And I still think they're clearly the second best team in the AFC. Can't see them not being the 2nd seed. And if they can pull off the win against the Patriots in a couple of weeks, they're going to be the number 1 seed. But what I could totally see happening is them looking at the AFC Championship game against New England, regardless of if New England's already played and won their game or not, and overlooking whoever they play in the division round. And while I think that they are clearly significantly better than every other AFC team that might make the playoffs, every one of those AFC teams that might make the playoffs are better than those 3 teams that they could have, would have, should have lost to, if it wasn't for a little, pulling their heads out of their butts for like a minute or 2 at the very end of the game. So they still have the advantage over the NFC teams that are coming up ahead of them, just in that if they play to their abilities, the only team that's better than them, or at least you could argue they're even better than the Patriots, but that's the only other team on the same level as them in the AFC. But I could just see them looking ahead and screwing up. All right, number 5, moving up 1 slot, the Saints. After beating the Panthers, they solidified a pretty strong lead in the division. They look pretty good there. Crazy, even though they're 9-3, they're squarely looking at the 4 seed right now. That's pretty insane. Running game is awesome. Drew Brees is still awesome. The defense is still playing great. This is a tough team. They're a legitimate Super Bowl contender. Number 4, the LA Rams moving up one slot. They got the job done again this week. I have them ahead of the Saints mostly because they beat them head to head, and at this point they're tied in the standings. So if they end up tied at the end of the season, they're going to be the 3 seed. The Saints are going to be the 4 seed. That's the biggest reason I have that. These are 2 very quality teams. The Rams are definitely a Super Bowl contender. They have a big test this week with the Eagles, and then they also still have another game against the Seahawks. So we're going to see what they're made of. But, the Saints, same thing. As I mentioned when we talked about the Falcons, they still have the Falcons twice. So that will be a big thing for them as well. So those 2 could definitely can move around depending on what happens. Like I said, if they end up tied, the Rams will finish ahead of the Saints in the standings. So that's the main reason I have them ahead of them right now. But otherwise, it's pretty kind of hard to call. All right, number 3. After a loss to Seattle, the Eagles are moving down 2 slots. They're moving down there, so clearly, obviously, they're going to be behind the Vikings since we haven't talked about them yet. And I have them below the Vikings for the same reason that they are behind them in the standings. They have the same record, but the Vikings have played a tougher schedule and have more quality wins. It's not the Eagles' fault that they have played mostly crap teams, but the only 3 teams that they played with winning record. Well, I guess the Chiefs don't even have a winning record anymore, and they lost to them. They lost to Seattle, and they did beat the Panthers, who I'm not actually that high on. But the thing is, even though they were playing a lot of bad teams, they were killing them. So, it wasn't like what we were saying with the Steelers. Yes, they've beaten all of those teams that weren't very good, but they've barely beaten them. The Eagles are beating the low-quality teams they were playing by like 20 or 30 points. So, again, I could have put the Eagles 2 instead of 3, but I think this is fair. Mostly because the number 2 Minnesota Vikings, moving up one slot, do have the same record and they've beaten the Saints, they beat the Rams, they've just been playing very well. They beat the Falcons this week. So they're beating a lot of the better teams in the NFC this year. So, and like I said, they are, if the season ended today, because the Eagles and the Vikings do not play in the regular season, when you go to some of the lower end tiebreakers, I think it was strength of victory is the one that they beat the Eagles out in. So, like I said, this can obviously change depending on who wins and who loses the rest of the way. If they both win out, I could still see the Eagles finishing ahead of them because they do have, that Rams game, so that would be a big one. But frankly, if they win out, I don't think I actually would change this. Again, it depends exactly on how the games go, but think that these teams, unless somebody really falls apart, I don't think there's going to be too much movement in this top 5-6 teams the rest of the way. Little jock game for position, but I don't see anybody falling out of there. And number 1, look who's back. Moving up one slot, the New England Patriots. Frankly, for the last few weeks, I actually feel that they were the best shot, based on my criteria of being the most likely to win the Super Bowl. Probably should have moved the Patriots up a while ago. Mostly because, not because I necessarily think that they're heads and shoulders above any of the 4, even 5 teams right behind them. But the same reason I was saying that the Steelers probably could have still been ahead of a few of those better NFC teams. Because, well, not necessarily better than them, but of these better NFC teams, because there's only one real competitor. So if the Patriots can beat the Steelers, I don't see any other team beating them without it being a monumentous upset. Where I could see the Vikings winning, I could see the Eagles winning, I could see the Rams winning, I could see the Saints winning, I could even see the Seahawks or Falcons, doing the 4 road game route to get to every game on the road route to getting to the Super Bowl, where I don't see that for any of the other AFC teams. But now they're tied for the best record. They won again. They're hot. Yeah, this is where everybody expected them to be to begin the season, so not too surprising there. Obviously, if they lose any of these other games that they have, now they have Miami, they have Buffalo, and they have the Jets. None of those are particularly worrisome. Obviously, anything could happen, but those are all games they should win and should be able to win reasonably easily. It's all going to come down to the game against the Steelers in 2 weeks. Whoever wins that game is most likely going to be the 1 seed, and whoever loses that is almost definitely going to be the 2nd seed. So, all right. Well, thanks for watching, and please like, comment, and share the videos, and subscribe to our channel. You can also follow us on other social media. Facebook and Twitter are both at MA Sports Central. Thanks, and we will see you soon.